An elderly farmer named Raymond Ellis is forced off his land by a development company despite never receiving proper notice. At first abandoned by his community, he gains support after a viral news story reveals his military past and deep roots in the town. Veterans, neighbors, and even schoolchildren rally around him, leading to a legal battle and national attention. Welcome to my channel. I'm not the kind of man who raises his voice. Never have been. Grew up believing your word's your bond, your land's your legacy, and you stand your ground, even if it's shaking beneath your boots. My name's Raymond Ellis. I'm 68 years old, and until one Tuesday morning in early spring, I was just a farmer. The sun had barely started climbing when I heard the tires crunching up the gravel path. I was out by the west field, checking the new lettuce shoots, still tender and green like spring promises. You learn to wake early in this line of work. The land doesn't care if you're tired, only that you show up. I wiped my hands on the hem of my shirt as I walked toward the house, thinking maybe the delivery guy was early, but it wasn't the usual truck. No, these were slick, black SUVs, shining like beetles in the light. 5 of them, at least. Men stepped out, clean-shaven, soft hands, sunglasses on like it was already noon. They looked wrong against my split-rail fence and hand-painted mailbox, like something out of a commercial break interrupting the life I knew. One of them, tan suit, shiny loafers already speckled with dew, stepped forward. "Mr. Ellis," he said, barely glancing up from his tablet. "We're from the Jennings Development Group. You've been served with a final notice to vacate this property. We're authorized to begin groundwork today." I thought maybe I misheard him. "Vacate?" I said. "You mean like leave?" He didn't flinch. "Correct. Your parcel was rezoned for commercial development last year. Compensation documents were sent to the listed address. You did receive those, right?" I laughed, not because it was funny, but because that's what you do when the world tries to turn upside down before breakfast. "No, I didn't receive anything. And I sure as hell didn't sign anything." He sighed, like I was the inconvenience. "That's something to take up with the county. But as far as we're concerned, we've got permits. We're on a tight construction schedule." I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just stood there, fingers clenched around my gloves, heart pounding in that slow, hard way that says something's wrong and it's too late to stop it. "This farm's been mine since '79, I said, voice steady. "It was my daddy's before me. My son was born in that house. Where would I even go?" That's when the other men started moving. One yanked the gate open. Another pulled tools out of the SUV. They were already walking toward the fence like it was theirs. I stepped in front of them, said loud enough for all to hear, "You so much as scratch one post, and I'll call the sheriff." The man in the suit just gave a thin smile. "Sir, we're not here to argue. We're here to work." They didn't stop. I watched one of them pull up the first post. It was cedar, sunk deep by my father's hands back when I was still learning to ride a bike. That post had seen winters, droughts, storms, and still stood proud. Until now. I didn't sleep much the night before, but adrenaline sharpened my edges. I stepped forward to block another man, and he shoved me. Now, I'm not a frail old man. My back's bent, but not broken, and I've lifted hay bales heavier than most of these boys could carry. Still, I stumbled, fell on one knee in my own field. "You should have retired years ago," the man muttered. "Nobody farms like this anymore." Neighbors watched. I saw them through kitchen windows and behind porch railings. Some held up phones. Some just watched, silent. One woman, Linda, I think her name was, looked away when I caught her eye. I'd given her squash last summer when her husband lost his job. No one spoke. No one stepped forward. By mid-morning, I was surrounded by strangers and machines. They'd trampled the spinach rows, the ones I'd planted by hand just after the last frost. I tried to read the documents they shoved at me, pages and pages of dense legal talk and signatures I didn't recognize. But I couldn't make sense of any of it. I didn't have a lawyer. Never needed one. I'd spent my life trusting handshakes and looking a man in the eye. At noon, they brought in a bulldozer. I stood and watched as it rolled over the orchard my grandfather planted with bare hands and borrowed seeds. Apple trees torn from the earth like weeds. And all I could do was sit. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills, I was on a splintered fence rail, holding a handful of my own soil. Black, damp, living earth. Dirt that had grown food for 3 generations. I didn't cry. I was taught not to. But my hands shook. My face was streaked with dust and sweat. A news crew showed up late in the afternoon. They interviewed me for 5 minutes. Asked if I felt sad. if I thought the new development would bring prosperity. I told them what I could. Told them this place wasn't just land. It was my home. It was the only peace I'd found since coming back from the Gulf War in '91. They nodded, but I could see it in their eyes. They already had the story written before they hit record. Later, I saw myself on TV, but I didn't recognize the man they showed. Some confused old farmer, standing in the way of a new shopping plaza. By the next morning, my name was on every local station. Not the way I'd hoped, if I'm honest. The segment was all of 90 seconds. No mention of the orchard or the 3 generations who'd worked this soil. No, they showed me sitting there with dirt on my face, stumbling over words, while a voiceover talked about progress. Said I'd refused to vacate a commercially designated area. Said I was blocking 200 new jobs. Then came the headlines. Elderly farmer resists economic progress. Town hero or local hindrance? Shopping complex to revitalize dead zone. Dead zone. That's what they called my land. The same land that used to grow the juiciest tomatoes in Williamson County. Dead zone. By Thursday, even folks I'd known for decades wouldn't look me in the eye. People I'd helped, fixed a barn door for, tilled a garden, delivered corn to when they were sick, just vanished. The old crew at the diner, where I'd eaten pancakes every Sunday since Reagan was president. Suddenly, no table for me. The waitress, Sharon, wouldn't meet my eyes when the manager asked me to leave. We're overbooked today, Mr. Ellis. Try us next week. Overbooked? It was half empty. I went home and walked the fields, or what was left of them. Fence lines broken. Rows of torn up earth. My dad used to say a man's land holds the memory of his footprints. But all I saw now were tire tracks. I tried calling the county office. Spoke to a clerk who sounded like she was still finishing her coffee. She didn't care what I'd received or not received. The rezoning was publicly posted, Mr. Ellis. It's not our fault if you didn't read the bulletin. Bulletin? The one tacked to a wall in the courthouse basement? But I never got a letter, I told her. And I sure didn't sign anything. There's been a mistake. Her voice turned cold. That's something you'll need to take up with your legal counsel. I didn't have one. Still don't. When I pushed back, she threatened to call security. I left without another word, just nodded and walked out with my boots echoing down the tiled hall. That night, I pulled a dusty box from the shelf in my garage. Inside were things I hadn't touched in years, military medals, folded flags, yellowed letters from men I'd served with. Gulf War, 1991. Operation Desert Storm. I found a photo of me and Nolan Jeffries, the buddy I dragged out of a burning Humvee while RPGs rained overhead. We were both 24 in that picture, covered in dust and laughing like we'd just won the Super Bowl. He didn't make it back. I did. And now, this is how it ends. Watching strangers turn my fields into parking lots? I held the folded flag in my lap and just sat there in the dark. I couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. The house felt too quiet without Sarah. She passed 10 years back, cancer. She was the one who used to talk sense when my blood ran hot. I imagined what she'd say now. Probably something like, "You've fought for this land your whole life, Ray. Don't you dare give it up without a fight." She always believed in me, even when I didn't. The next morning, I opened my email, something I rarely did, and saw a message from a stranger. It read, "Saw what happened. You don't know me, but my uncle was in your unit. Said you saved his life. I'm an attorney now. If you want help, I'll represent you pro bono." That name, Tucker Jeffries, Nolan's nephew. I stared at the screen for a long time. Didn't even realize my hand was shaking until I knocked over my coffee mug. The first spark of hope since this mess began flickered in my gut. I replied with one word, yes. Later that day, I got another message. This one from a local reporter who actually wanted to hear my side of the story. Said she was doing a piece on rural displacement. Not just the kind you read about in textbooks, but real stories. People like me. I told her to come by the next day. Told her to wear boots. I didn't know it yet, but that email, that one word, was the first domino. The wind was starting to shift. I could feel it in my bones. The reporter showed up the next morning right on time, boots and all. Her name was Daria Fletcher, sharp eyes and no-nonsense posture, the kind you get from chasing stories people want buried. She shook my hand firm and respectful, and didn't once look over my shoulder like she had somewhere better to be. We sat on the porch while I poured coffee from a thermos Sarah gave me our last Christmas together. Daria pulled out a small recorder and asked gently, "Mr. Ellis, what happened out here?" I looked out at the field, what was left of it, and tried to find the right words. They came before sunrise. Said I had to leave. Told me this land wasn't mine anymore. And you had no warning? Not a single letter. Just a man in sunglasses and a clipboard. She didn't interrupt. Just listened. And that meant something, you know? In a world where everyone's always talking, someone sitting quiet while you bleed your truth, well, that's rare. After about an hour of questions, she turned off the recorder and said softly, "This isn't just a local story." I didn't know what she meant until 2 days later when the article dropped. A Farmer's Roots, How Progress Bulldozes the American Heartland. My name, my farm, the old orchard, right there in black and white. She didn't just tell what happened. She showed it. She talked about heirloom seeds and my volunteer deliveries to the food pantry. She even mentioned Sarah. Called her the backbone of the Ellis homestead. That's when the calls started coming. First, it was a couple from town, elderly folks I used to deliver squash and corn to back when their car broke down every other week. They said they saw the article and asked if I needed anything. I didn't ask for help, but they dropped off a fresh pie and a note that said, "We remember." Then the phone rang again. This time, it was a voice I hadn't heard in 40 years. "Ray? You old coot. You still remember how to hold a wrench? Or did you finally turn soft?" I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Charlie Pendleton, as I live and breathe. Charlie and I had served together overseas. He'd lost half a finger in Kuwait but never lost his sense of humor. I hadn't seen him since Sarah's funeral, and we'd only spoken twice since then. But he said one thing that hit like a brick in my chest. "You saved my hide in '91, Ray. My turn." He showed up 2 days later in a beat-up RV with Texas plates and a big American flag mounted to the bumper. His beard was white, belly rounder than I remembered, but those eyes still burned bright. "I brought company," he said as he stepped out, and sure enough, 2 more old friends from the battalion climbed out behind him. One on a cane, the other missing a foot but grinning like a schoolboy on the last day of class. They weren't the last. By the end of the week, my yard looked like a veterans' reunion. Old warriors, silver-haired and sunburned, rolling in from Tennessee, the Carolinas, and all the way from Illinois. Most of us hadn't spoken in years. Some hadn't even met in person, just shared the same mud, the same fear, the same unspoken promise to never leave a brother behind. And they were here for me. We set up tents along the edge of the field. One of them brought an old army field stove. Somebody else hung a sign between 2 trees. This land was earned, not bought. I didn't ask for it. I couldn't have imagined it. But it happened just the same. And then, just like that, the cameras came back. Only this time, they weren't from the local stations. They had national logos. Fox, CNN, even PBS. They wanted to talk to the veteran whose land was being taken. One network set up a live feed from the back of a pickup truck. The county office issued a statement, cold and formal. All proper notifications were made. The development project complies with existing zoning regulations. But people weren't buying it anymore. A little girl from the school down the road painted a sign that said, "Give Mr. Ray back his farm." Her mom posted it on social media. It got shared 10,000 times in 3 days. One morning, while I was splitting wood behind the shed, a man in a crisp gray suit stepped through the gate. Introduced himself as Carson Weller, head of community outreach for Jennings Development Group. He extended a hand, but I didn't take it. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Ellis, we'd like to offer a reassessment. In light of recent visibility." Visibility, I repeated. That what you call a man losing everything he's worked for? His smile didn't falter. "We'd like to avoid further controversy. Perhaps consider a compromise, financial compensation above the original offer. Generous terms." Charlie came around the corner just then, arms crossed. "You better get off this property, Slick, before we start charging rent for standing on it." Weller didn't argue. Just adjusted his tie and backed out the gate. They were rattled. I could feel it. A week ago, I was just an old man no one wanted to listen to. Now, I wasn't standing alone. The days started rolling together after that. We were no longer just a bunch of old war buddies holding ground. We were something bigger now, an outpost of memory in a world too busy chasing what's next to remember what came before. And the town? It started to stir. The mayor's office released a public statement saying the council was reevaluating community feedback and would review procedural transparency. I reckon it was about as close as they'd ever come to saying we might have screwed up. But we weren't naive. Words on paper don't stop bulldozers. That's when the lawyer showed up. Young guy, maybe early 30s, sharp suit that didn't look like it belonged in our part of the county. Said his name was Tucker Jeffries, the one who'd emailed me. When I met him in person, I saw the same eyes Nolan used to have. Eyes that had seen hard things, even if this kid hadn't seen war. "You don't owe me a thing, Mr. Ellis," he said as we sat at my kitchen table. "I just came to make sure they don't take one more inch than they're legally entitled to." He flipped open a binder and started pointing things out: zoning inconsistencies, notice errors, language that didn't meet the notification standards for veteran-owned properties. "They counted on you not understanding the fine print," he said. "We're going to use that against them." By the time he finished, I felt something I hadn't in weeks: hope. That evening, I walked the perimeter of what used to be the south field. A few surveyor stakes still stuck up like splinters. I knelt and pulled one out. My hand lingered in the dirt for a while. I wasn't praying. I don't do that much these days. But I was remembering. My dad teaching me how to lay irrigation lines with nothing but a shovel and stubbornness. Sarah laughing in the garden with her wide-brimmed straw hat and freckles. My boy Ethan catching lightning bugs barefoot before bedtime. You don't forget land like that. It gets in your skin. That weekend, something else happened. Families started showing up, not just to gawk or take photos, but to help. A retired schoolteacher named Bernice dropped off sweet tea and biscuits. A high school kid brought a flat of lettuce seedlings. The hardware store donated fence posts. We rebuilt the line they tore down, every inch of it, post by post. And it wasn't just the fence going back up. It was something deeper, something that had been asleep in this town for a long time. People were remembering each other. A mom I didn't know walked her daughter up to me and said, "Mr. Ellis, I didn't know what happened to you. We're here now. What can we do?" The girl, maybe 8, 9 years old, held out a tiny American flag. "For your garden," she said. I thanked her, choked on the words. I hadn't cried since Sarah passed. I didn't then, either. But it was close. On Sunday morning, I heard the familiar crunch of gravel. Figured it might be more reporters or another camera crew. But when I stepped out, it wasn't that. It was the congregation from the little Baptist church down the hill. All of them. Pastor Leroy walked up the drive in his Sunday best and said, "Raymond, we figured the land needed a blessing. And maybe we did, too." He didn't ask. He just led his people into my field, dozens of them, and started planting rows. Tomatoes, squash, okra. Someone set up a table and made sandwiches. A gospel hymn hummed across the dirt rows like wind. Charlie leaned next to me and muttered, "Well, damn. Didn't expect revival to break out on a bean field." I grinned. The next morning, Jennings Development issued a new press release. They were pausing operations indefinitely. Public relations speak, of course, meant they were feeling the pressure. Tucker filed an injunction the same day. He attached every local and national article, every veteran testimony, and a long letter signed by 122 residents demanding a full investigation into how the rezoning was handled. The judge issued a temporary stay. They couldn't touch my land until the court ruled. That night, someone dropped off a basket on my porch. No note, just fresh eggs, jam, and a card with a single sentence: "This town was built on men like you." We drove to the courthouse in Tucker's old pickup truck, one of those boxy Fords that rattled like a coffee can full of bolts. He said it belonged to his uncle before he passed, same uncle I'd pulled from that blown-out Humvee back in '91. Funny how the past loops around like that. Makes you wonder if nothing's ever really done, just waiting for its turn to matter again. The courtroom wasn't packed, but it wasn't empty either. Some familiar faces from town, a few reporters with cameras low and ready, and folks from the church and neighborhood sitting quietly in the back row. One of them, I think it was Bernice, handed me a peppermint as I walked past. No words, just that little gesture. It said everything. Jennings Development showed up with a full legal team of suits so fresh they still had price tags in the collar, laptops glowing, binders stacked like they were expecting a war. Their lead attorney was a man named Ronald Kent, slick voice, practiced charm, the kind of guy who knows how to smile while he's gutting your future. He stood up first. "Your Honor, my clients lawfully acquired the right to develop this property. All necessary procedures were followed to the letter of county zoning regulations. Mr. Ellis, while we respect his service and history, failed to respond to posted notices, and the permits were issued accordingly." I sat still, hands folded in my lap, trying not to let my blood boil. Then Tucker stood. He didn't pace or raise his voice, just opened a folder and laid it all out. "Your Honor," he said, "our case isn't just about zoning. It's about how those rules were applied selectively. Mr. Ellis received no direct communication, no certified mail. The public notice was posted in a bulletin inside a rarely accessed government annex building on a wall behind a vending machine. The judge's brow lifted at that. Tucker continued, "Furthermore, we found at least 3 properties rezoned in the same district, none of which belonged to veterans. All received personal visits or certified letters. Mr. Ellis did not." Then he handed over a stack of signed affidavits. Neighbors, townsfolk, even an old VA representative. He paused and looked around the room before finishing. Mr. Ellis is not asking for special treatment. He's asking for the same basic courtesy any landowner deserves. The right to be heard before his world is ripped apart. It was quiet when he sat down. The judge, a stern-looking woman with a streak of silver in her braid, leaned forward. "Mr. Kent, did Jennings Development ever attempt direct contact with Mr. Ellis prior to permit execution?" Kent shifted, flipping through his notes. "We, relied on standard municipal protocol." The judge looked unimpressed. Then, something unexpected happened. The back doors opened and a man stepped in wearing a faded army field jacket and a ball cap pulled low. Walked stiffly like his joints had forgotten what comfort meant. He came forward, nodded to the bailiff, and whispered something in his ear. The judge leaned down when the bailiff approached. Her eyes widened slightly. She turned to Tucker. "Mr. Jeffries, are you aware that a Colonel Thomas Harwood has submitted a request to speak on behalf of Mr. Ellis?" Tucker blinked. "I am not, Your Honor." "I sure wasn't either." But when Colonel Harwood stood at the witness bench, everything stopped. He cleared his throat and said, "I commanded Bravo Battalion, 3rd Armored, 1990-91. During Operation Desert Storm, Sergeant Raymond Ellis exposed himself to enemy fire to extract 3 wounded soldiers, one of them being my son. He's the reason I have a son today." The courtroom fell to a hush. The colonel continued, voice steady, grave. "This man returned home, didn't ask for medals, didn't demand recognition. He built a life on this soil. Worked it every day since. Taught local kids how to grow tomatoes. Fed neighbors out of his own pocket. And now we're debating whether it's legal to kick him off the land he's tended for over 40 years because someone slipped a notice behind a vending machine?" He looked directly at the judge. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this is about more than land. This is about whether decency still counts for something in this country." Then he sat. I didn't move. Couldn't. Felt like my heart was trying to do something it hadn't done in years, believe. The judge called a recess. Out in the hallway, people patted my back, offered handshakes, even a hug or two. The old coffee shop owner from town pressed a thermos into my hands. "Hot," she said. "Just like you like it. No charge." When court resumed, the judge looked over her glasses. "I'm issuing a temporary injunction barring Jennings Development from further action on Mr. Ellis's property pending a full investigation into the notice procedure and potential zoning inconsistencies. Additionally, I'm requesting that the county board provide documentation of all veteran-owned property notifications issued in the past 5 years." Her gavel came down hard. It wasn't a final victory, but it was enough. As we stepped out into the afternoon sun, I heard a familiar voice behind me. It was Charlie, grinning. "Well, Ray, I think we just planted something stronger than corn today." I looked back at the courthouse and nodded. We were just getting started. The next few days felt like the calm after a storm until the next one rolled in. Jennings Development didn't take the court ruling quietly. Their PR machine kicked into overdrive. Mailers showed up in town claiming the new complex would bring economic revitalization and that certain individuals were resisting progress. One even had a smiling stock photo of a little girl holding a shopping bag next to a line that read, "A better future, just waiting to be built." Folks who'd supported me started getting cold feet. The diner put up a sign, "We welcome all neighbors, old and new." It didn't mention me by name, but the message was clear. I stopped going. Even Bernice, sweet as she was, called one evening and said, "Ray, just be careful. Some people are getting testy." Still, we kept working. Tucker was knee-deep in records, and a few volunteers helped replant the parts of the orchard we could save. The trees wouldn't bear fruit for years, but planting them felt like saying, "We're not leaving." Then one morning, I found something taped to my door. A manila envelope. No return address. Inside was a black and white photo, yellowed at the edges. Me and my dad, 1971, standing in front of the barn back when his hair was still dark, and mine hadn't started thinning. Tucked behind the photo was a deed. Not a copy, the original. And a note. He bought this land outright in '69. With money from selling the only car we had. Never borrowed a cent. Never told anyone. The signature at the bottom? E. Ellis. My mother. She passed 15 years ago. I stood in my kitchen holding that deed like it was a living thing. Suddenly the weight of it all hit me, not just my fight, but theirs. My father's boots walked this soil. My mother's hands fed it. And now, even gone, they were still fighting with me. I called Tucker. He came over in 10 minutes flat. "Ray," he said, looking at the deed, "this isn't just proof of ownership. This is proof of blood." The county announced a public meeting, an open forum to address concerns. Truth was, it felt more like a show. One of those polite disasters where decisions had already been made behind closed doors. Still, we went. The town hall filled up fast. Press in the back. Local business owners up front. Some folks I hadn't seen in years filed in quietly. A few nodded when they saw me. Most just looked away. The county board sat behind folding tables, neat nameplates in front of them. Jennings Development sent a rep too, same guy as before, Carson Weller. Shiny shoes, practiced smile. He opened with a speech about economic momentum and the greater good. Talked about jobs, growth, how the county needed this. I heard the words, but they bounced off me like hail on a tin roof. Then the moderator said, "Mr. Ellis, would you like to speak?" I stood. Not because I wanted to, but because sometimes standing matters more than speaking. I looked out at the faces. I was born in this town. Buried my wife here. I farmed this land longer than some of you have been alive. I've given away more food than I've ever sold. I didn't come here tonight to beg. I paused. I came here to remind you. This land isn't just soil. It's memory. It's sacrifice. My parents didn't pass it down so a parking lot could go up. No applause. Just quiet. Then a voice from the back said, "He's right." It was the last person I expected. Sheriff Nolan Price. We hadn't spoken in over a decade, not since he fined me over a land dispute with a neighbor. But now, he stepped forward. "I served with Ray. I know what he's done for this town quietly for years. Maybe it's time we listen." A few heads turned. A couple of hands clapped, awkward and slow. But it was something. Later, as I stepped outside into the cool night air, a woman I didn't recognize handed me a folded slip of paper. On it, a single line. "We're with you. Keep going." And I knew then, we weren't done yet. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Cloudless sky, warm breeze, and a bulldozer parked right at the edge of my orchard. The injunction hadn't even expired, but Jennings had sent in subcontractors to prepare the perimeter. Fancy talk for pushing boundaries. Literally. I walked out there, slow but steady, and stood in front of the machine. The young operator cut the engine, climbed down, and said, "Sorry, sir. Just doing my job." I nodded. "Then I'm doing mine." He didn't argue. Just left the keys in the cab and drove off in a pickup. Tucker got there 20 minutes later, out of breath and furious. "They're trying to provoke you," he said. "Push hard enough. Maybe you snap, and they get the footage they want." I didn't snap, but someone else did. That night, a video hit social media. A drone clip, silent, black and white, showing the full spread of my land, the tents, the banner. It ended with a single phrase across the screen. "Would you bulldoze your grandfather's boots?" Nobody claimed the video, but within hours, it had over 100,000 views. By morning, it was a wildfire. Veteran groups across the country shared it. Church newsletters, garden clubs, even a national environmental group. My phone buzzed until the battery died. Reporters started calling it the farm that stood still. Jennings tried to control the narrative. Spokespeople talked about shared values and the need to balance legacy with opportunity. But it was too late. People weren't buying what they were selling. That afternoon, 2 buses pulled up outside my house. Veterans. Dozens of them. From different wars, different states. Some in uniforms that didn't fit quite right anymore. Some with flags. Some with signs that simply said, "We remember." I walked out to meet them. A woman in desert fatigues, missing a leg, standing on a blade, saluted. "My father said you pulled him out of a minefield in '91. He died last year. I'm here for him." I couldn't speak. Just nodded and shook her hand. By sundown, the line of people stretched past the fence line, right up to the old scarecrow post. In Jennings? They went dark. No more bulldozers. No more press releases. The land was quiet again. For now. The governor's office called. Not an assistant. Not a spokesperson. The governor herself. Her voice was calm, polished, but I could hear the strain underneath. "Mr. Ellis," she said, "we've been watching what's unfolded. The state would like to propose a compromise." Tucker leaned in, listening on speaker. "Let's hear it." She laid it out clean. The state would freeze the development indefinitely and declare the property a heritage agricultural landmark. It would stay a working farm, but also serve as a community learning space, preserved under veteran stewardship. Jennings would be forced to relocate their project. Your story, she added, has moved people. We'd like to honor that. Tucker was already nodding. It's everything we hoped for. But I sat still, quiet. Because I knew what came next. This meant attention. Tours. Cameras. School groups. No more just me in the dirt, in the quiet mornings. No more fading quietly into the rows I'd planted for decades. I looked out the window, past the porch, across the orchard where new saplings had taken root. I accept, I said, finally. But under one condition. The governor waited. It stays simple. No plaques. No statues. No spotlight. Just a place where people learn what soil can give when you treat it with care. She paused, then said, "You have my word." We ended the call, and for a moment, Tucker and I just sat there. Not triumphant. Not overwhelmed. Just still. That evening, we walked the field. The veterans stayed behind to cook supper over a fire. Laughter echoed through the trees. For once, it didn't feel like resistance. It felt like peace. Then, just before the sun dipped below the hills, I planted the last of the new apple saplings, wrapped a ribbon around its base. And in the stillness, I whispered, "You're home now." 3 months later, the fields were green again. Not perfect, not like before, but alive. We'd replanted most of what had been torn up: corn, beans, squash. The apple saplings were still just sticks with dreams, but they stood tall in their rows. Kids from the local school came every Saturday morning. Some had never touched a seed before. Others asked if tractors were like horses but louder. I taught them the way my father taught me. Kneel down, feel the soil, don't rush. The veterans stayed too. Not all of them, but enough. Charlie still snores like a freight train in the RV out back. That field stove he brought still gets more use than my own kitchen. The governor kept her promise. The land was designated a Veterans Agricultural Heritage Site, the first of its kind in the state. No fanfare, no ribbon cutting, just a letter in the mail and a notarized seal that said, "Protected." Jennings Development rerouted. Built their shopping center 5 miles down the highway, closer to the freeway exit. I hear they're struggling to fill it. Folks around here started caring about where things come from, who grows them, who tends them. Sometimes it takes losing something to understand its worth. One afternoon, I was kneeling in the shade of a young apple tree, checking the mulch, when a girl about 10 years old sat down beside me. Long braid, freckles, dirt on her chin. "Mr. Ray," she asked, "is this your land now?" I looked out at the rows. The garden plots. The veterans teaching 2 kids how to repair a fence. Tucker walking a reporter past the shed. I thought of Sarah, of Dad and Mom, of Nolan Jeffries, of the field where we buried things too hard to carry, and where new things kept growing anyway. "No," I told her gently. "It belongs to folks who show up when it matters. Folks like you." She smiled and pressed a seed into the dirt. I covered it with my hand, not to show her how, but because some things deserve to be witnessed. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I stood at the edge of the field. The scarecrow we rebuilt swayed in the breeze, his hat tipped just enough to feel like a nod. The flag flew high again, same one I folded the day they tried to take it all. But now it caught the light like it was shining from within. I still miss Sarah every morning. Still walk the rows before breakfast. Still fix things with baling wire and hope. But now, I'm not alone. Not in the fields. Not in the fight. And not in the future. Because this story, my story, ain't just about a man and his land. It's about what grows when you stand your ground. And who chooses to stand with you.